October 2016. The autumn air hung heavy with moisture as morning fog rolled across the Milwaukee River, casting an eerie pallor over the aging brick buildings of the city's east side. 3 unmarked police vehicles and a forensic van pulled into the narrow alley behind the Riverside Animal Clinic on North Water Street, their engines cutting through the unusual silence that had settled over the normally bustling veterinary practice. Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing patient files in her office when Detective Michael Rodriguez knocked on her door, his weathered face bearing the weight of decades spent solving Milwaukee's darkest mysteries. What began as a routine examination of archived veterinary records during a building renovation had transformed into the key that would finally unlock a 53-year-old murder case that had haunted the city's collective memory. The discovery had occurred just 48 hours earlier, when construction workers renovating the clinic's basement storage area found a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and remarkably preserved, lay the personal ledger of Dr. Herman Kowalski, the clinic's original owner who had died in 1987. The leather-bound journal contained not only detailed records of animal treatment spanning from 1958 to 1975, but also cryptic notations that would prove to be the missing pieces of a puzzle that had confounded investigators since the Kennedy administration. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable breakthrough that finally brought justice to a family who had waited over 5 decades for answers, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for the detailed analysis and exclusive insights that mainstream coverage always seems to leave out. You're about to hear revelations that will change everything you thought you knew about this case. The victim at the center of this decades-old mystery was Margaret Rose Sullivan, born on April 15, 1945, to Irish immigrants Thomas and Catherine Sullivan. At 18 years old, Margaret stood 5 feet 7 inches tall with striking auburn hair that cascaded in gentle waves to her shoulders, inherited from her mother's side of the family. Her bright green eyes, which friends described as sparkling with mischief and intelligence, were framed by delicate features that made her the subject of many admiring glances as she walked through Milwaukee's historic Third Ward. Margaret possessed an athletic build from years of swimming at the local YMCA, where she volunteered as a lifeguard during summer months, and had a distinctive crescent-shaped scar on her left palm from a childhood accident involving her father's carpentry tools. Thomas Sullivan worked as a foreman at the Allen Bradley plant, while Catherine managed their modest household and took in sewing to supplement the family income. Margaret was the middle child of 5 with 2 older brothers, Patrick and James, who had both enlisted in the military, and 2 younger sisters, Colleen and Bridget, who looked up to their vivacious sister with undisguised admiration. The family lived in a cramped but spotlessly clean apartment above a bakery on South 2nd Street, where the aroma of fresh bread provided a constant backdrop to their daily lives. Margaret's personality was a captivating blend of determination and compassion that drew people to her like moths to flame. Her best friend since childhood, Dorothy Kowalczyk, would later tell investigators, "Maggie had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. She never met a stranger, and she had dreams bigger than Milwaukee could contain." Her high school English teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Hartman, remembered her as exceptionally bright and articulate, with a passion for literature that rivaled students twice her age. Margaret harbored ambitious dreams of becoming a journalist. Inspired by the trailblazing work of female reporters she read about in national magazines that she would borrow from the public library every Saturday morning. During the autumn of 1963, Margaret was working part-time at Goldman's department store while attending evening classes at Milwaukee Area Technical College, determined to earn her degree despite her family's modest financial circumstances. Her typical day began at 6 in the morning, helping her mother prepare breakfast for the family, followed by a 40-minute streetcar ride to her job in the ladies' clothing department, where she displayed a natural talent for helping customers find exactly what they needed. Milwaukee in 1963 was a city caught between its industrial past and an uncertain future. With a population of approximately 741,000 residents who took pride in their Germanic heritage and blue-collar work ethic. The city's east side, where Margaret spent most of her time, was experiencing the early stages of urban renewal that would eventually transform the waterfront area. Local businesses like Kowalski's Meat Market, Weber's Bakery, and the Riverside Animal Clinic served as anchors for neighborhoods where families had lived for generations, creating tight-knit communities where everyone knew their neighbor's business. The social climate of the era was marked by the lingering optimism of the post-war boom, though shadows of the civil rights movement and growing concerns about the situation in Vietnam had begun to creep into everyday conversations. Milwaukee's Polish and Irish communities maintained strong cultural identities, with neighborhood taverns serving as unofficial community centers, where local news spread faster than any newspaper could print it. The city's Catholic churches played central roles in family life, and it was not uncommon for 3 generations of the same family to attend the same parish throughout their entire lives. November 23, 1963, began as an ordinary Saturday for Margaret Sullivan, though it would prove to be anything but typical for the nation. President Kennedy's assassination the day before had left the entire country reeling, and Milwaukee was no exception to the collective shock and mourning that gripped American communities from coast to coast. Margaret had planned to spend the day running errands for her mother and meeting friends, unaware that she was walking into the final hours of her young life. The timeline of Margaret's last day has been meticulously reconstructed through witness statements and her own diary entries, which were found in her bedroom and provided crucial insights into her state of mind. At 8:30 a.m., she attended morning mass at St. Stanislaus Catholic Church with her mother and younger sisters, where Father O'Brien delivered a somber homily about the tragedy that had befallen the nation. Margaret's diary entry from that morning read, "The whole world feels different today. How can someone so young and full of hope just be gone? It makes you realize how precious every moment truly is." Following Mass at approximately 10:15 a.m., Margaret stopped at Kowalski's Meat Market to pick up a turkey for the family's belated Thanksgiving dinner, which had been postponed due to the national mourning. Store owner Stanley Kowalski later recalled that she seemed more subdued than usual, but maintained her characteristic warmth when asking about his wife's recent illness. At 11:45 a.m., she met her friend Dorothy at Schuster's department store downtown, where they spent nearly 2 hours looking at Christmas decorations and discussing their dreams for the future. Dorothy would later testify that Margaret seemed excited about a potential job opportunity she had heard about through a family friend, though she was deliberately vague about the details. She kept saying she couldn't talk about it yet, but that it might be her big break, Dorothy remembered. "I assumed it was something related to her journalism aspirations, maybe at one of the local newspapers." At 2:30 p.m., the two friends parted ways at the corner of Wisconsin Avenue and Water Street, with Dorothy heading home to help prepare for her family's own delayed Thanksgiving celebration. At 3:15 p.m., Margaret was seen entering the Riverside Animal Clinic by Mrs. Helen Novak, who lived in the apartment building across the street and was returning from grocery shopping. Mrs. Novak found it unusual because the clinic was normally closed on weekends, but she noticed that the lights were on in the back office. This sighting would prove crucial to the investigation, as it placed Margaret at the scene during what investigators would later determine was the approximate time of her death. The final confirmed sighting of Margaret alive came at 3:45 p.m., when postal worker Robert Chen observed her talking animatedly with someone in the clinic's parking lot. Chen, who was completing his Saturday route, noted that Margaret appeared to be engaged in serious conversation with a tall man in a dark coat, though he was unable to see the man's face clearly from his position across the street. This witness statement would haunt investigators for decades. As it suggested, Margaret knew her killer and went with him willingly. Margaret's body was discovered on Monday morning, November 25th, by Dr. Herman Kowalski himself when he arrived to check on an injured German shepherd that had been brought in Friday evening. The veterinarian's screams could be heard 3 blocks away as he stumbled from the clinic's treatment room, where Margaret's lifeless form lay on the examination table, positioned as if she were merely sleeping. The scene was both haunting and bizarre, with no obvious signs of struggle or violence visible to the untrained eye. Detective Frank Morrison, the first investigator to arrive on the scene, would later describe it as one of the most perplexing crime scenes I encountered in 30 years of police work. Margaret was fully clothed in the same navy blue wool dress and matching coat she had worn to Mass that morning, with her purse neatly placed on a nearby counter and her shoes aligned perfectly beneath the table. There were no signs of robbery, sexual assault, or obvious trauma, leading to initial speculation that she might have died from natural causes or accidental poisoning. However, the medical examiner's preliminary assessment revealed subtle but significant details that pointed to foul play. Margaret's fingernails contained traces of an unknown substance, later identified as a rare veterinary sedative used primarily for large animals. Small puncture wounds on her neck, barely visible to the naked eye, suggested she had been injected with something that caused her death. Most disturbing of all, her body had been carefully cleaned and arranged, indicating that her killer had spent considerable time at the scene after her death. The crime scene yielded several pieces of evidence that would prove crucial to the eventual solution of the case, though their significance would not become apparent for more than 5 decades. These included a single strand of dark hair that did not belong to Margaret, found clutched in her left hand, a partial fingerprint on the clinic's medicine cabinet that did not match any employees, traces of an unusual cologne on Margaret's clothing, a small piece of torn fabric caught on the examination table, footprints in the alley behind the clinic that appeared to be from expensive dress shoes, medication vials that had been disturbed in the storage room, and most puzzling of all, a handwritten appointment notation for MS special consultation in the clinic's scheduling book. The community's reaction to Margaret's death was swift and intense, with rumors and theories spreading like wildfire through the close-knit neighborhoods of Milwaukee's East Side. Many residents had known Margaret since she was a child, and her reputation as a kind, ambitious young woman made the tragedy even more difficult to comprehend. Local newspapers covered the story extensively, with headlines such as "Young Irish Beauty Found Dead in Vet Clinic" and "Mystery Surrounds Death of Popular Milwaukee Teen." Father O'Brien organized prayer vigils at St. Stanislaus Church, which were attended by hundreds of community members who lit candles and shared memories of Margaret's infectious smile and generous spirit. The Sullivan family's grief was compounded by the constant attention from reporters and curious neighbors who gathered outside their apartment building, hoping for any news about the investigation's progress. Catherine Sullivan, Margaret's mother, was so overcome with anguish that she required medical attention and was unable to attend her daughter's funeral 3 days later. Take a moment to think about your own community and the people who matter to you. Crimes like this remind us that tragedy can strike anywhere, at any time. If this case is resonating with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. The initial police investigation was hampered by the limited forensic technology available in 1963, when DNA analysis was still decades away and fingerprint databases were maintained manually on paper cards. Detective Morrison assembled a task force of 6 officers to work the case, but they were operating with investigative methods that seem primitive by today's standards. The Milwaukee Police Department's Homicide Division consisted of only 12 detectives responsible for covering the entire city, and they were simultaneously working on several other high-profile cases that demanded their attention. Despite these limitations, investigators identified 5 primary suspects within the first 2 weeks of the investigation, each with potential motives and opportunity to commit the crime. The first suspect was Dr. Herman Kowalski himself, age 42, who owned and operated the Riverside Animal Clinic, where Margaret's body was discovered. Investigators found his reaction to discovering the body suspiciously dramatic, and they noted several inconsistencies in his initial statements about his weekend activities. However, Kowalski had a solid alibi for Saturday afternoon, as he was attending his nephew's wedding reception at the Polish-American Club, with dozens of witnesses confirming his presence throughout the relevant time period. The second suspect was James Patrick Murphy, age 26, a delivery driver who regularly serviced businesses in the area and had been seen flirting with Margaret at Goldman's department store on several occasions. Murphy had a criminal record for petty theft and public intoxication, which immediately drew police attention. Investigators discovered that he had made several unwelcome advances toward Margaret in the weeks leading up to her death, and store employees confirmed that she had complained to management about his inappropriate behavior. However, Murphy's delivery logs showed that he was working a route in suburban Wauwatosa on the day of the murder, and multiple customers verified his presence during the critical time frame. Vincent Thomas Kowalczyk, age 34, emerged as the third suspect due to his position as a part-time maintenance worker at several East Side businesses, including the animal clinic. Kowalczyk, who was Dorothy's older brother and therefore knew Margaret well, had keys to most of the buildings on his maintenance route and would have had easy access to the clinic after hours. Police discovered that he had been experiencing financial difficulties and had been drinking heavily in the months before Margaret's death. His wife reported that he had come home unusually late on Saturday night with scratches on his face and muddy clothes, but Kowalczyk claimed he had been helping a friend move furniture, a story that was eventually corroborated by multiple witnesses. The fourth suspect was Dr. Richard Allen Brennan, age 38, a recently divorced physician who had been volunteering at local clinics to rebuild his reputation after a malpractice lawsuit had damaged his medical practice. Brennan had access to the types of medications found in Margaret's system, and several people reported seeing him in the vicinity of the animal clinic on the weekend of the murder. Police investigation revealed that Brennan had been struggling with alcohol addiction and depression following his divorce, and he had no solid alibi for Saturday afternoon. However, further investigation showed that the sedative used to kill Margaret was not available at human medical facilities, and Brennan had no known connection to veterinary supplies. The final primary suspect was Robert Earl Chen, age 24, the postal worker who had reported seeing Margaret talking with an unknown man in the clinic's parking lot. Investigators initially considered Chen's detailed description of the scene suspicious, theorizing that he might have inserted himself into the investigation to deflect suspicion from his own involvement. Background checks revealed that Chen had been disciplined at work for inappropriate comments to female customers, and he had no witnesses to verify his whereabouts after completing his postal route on Saturday afternoon. However, polygraph tests and extensive questioning failed to produce any evidence linking Chen to the crime, and his cooperation with the investigation eventually convinced police of his innocence. As weeks turned into months, the investigation gradually lost momentum, as each promising lead failed to produce sufficient evidence for an arrest. The limited forensic capabilities of the era meant that crucial evidence collected at the scene could not be properly analyzed, and witness statements became increasingly unreliable as memories faded and details became confused. By the summer of 1964, the case had been reassigned to the department's cold case division, where it would remain largely dormant for the next several decades. The last significant investigative activity occurred in December 1964, when Detective Morrison received an anonymous tip suggesting that Margaret had been involved with a married man who might have killed her to prevent his wife from discovering the affair. However, extensive investigation failed to identify any evidence supporting this theory, and the anonymous caller never contacted police again, despite repeated public appeals for additional information. By early 1965, the case was officially classified as an unsolved homicide, joining dozens of other files in the department's growing collection of cold cases. The passage of time seemed to mock the Sullivan family's desperate need for answers and justice. By now, if you're watching this late in the evening, you might want to grab a coffee or tea, because the story is about to take some incredible turns that you won't want to miss. The impact of Margaret's unsolved murder on the Sullivan family was profound and lasting, creating wounds that would never fully heal despite the passage of more than 5 decades. Thomas Sullivan, Margaret's father, channeled his grief and frustration into an obsessive quest for justice that would consume the remainder of his life. He spent countless hours walking through the neighborhoods where Margaret had lived and died, questioning anyone who would listen, and following up on rumors and tips that police had long since abandoned. Thomas kept detailed notebooks filled with his own theories and observations, creating a parallel investigation that he continued until his death from a heart attack in 1979. Catherine Sullivan dealt with her loss in a completely different manner, retreating into a religious devotion that bordered on fanaticism as she attended daily mass and spent hours each day praying for her daughter's soul and for justice to finally prevail. Catherine transformed Margaret's bedroom into a shrine, keeping every item exactly as it had been on November 23, 1963, down to the book that lay open on the nightstand and the clothes draped over the chair. "I keep expecting her to walk through that door and ask what's for dinner," Catherine told a newspaper reporter in 1973, on the 10th anniversary of the murder. The grief aged Catherine prematurely, turning her auburn hair white within 2 years of Margaret's death and leaving deep lines of sorrow etched permanently on her once youthful face. Patrick Sullivan, Margaret's older brother, returned from his army deployment in Germany to find his family shattered and his neighborhood changed forever by the tragedy. Patrick struggled with survivors' guilt and anger, frequently getting into fights with anyone who dared to suggest that the case should be forgotten or that Margaret might have somehow brought her fate upon herself. He moved to California in 1967, unable to bear living in the same city where his sister had been murdered, but he maintained regular correspondence with Milwaukee police detectives and continued to submit tips and theories from his new home in San Diego. Patrick never married, telling friends that he could never fully commit to building a future when his sister's past remained so unresolved. James Sullivan, the other older brother, took a different approach to processing his grief by dedicating himself to helping other families who had lost loved ones to violent crime. James became involved with early victim advocacy groups in Milwaukee and eventually founded the Margaret Sullivan Memorial Fund, which provided financial assistance to families struggling with funeral expenses and other costs associated with violent crime. "Maggie always wanted to help people, so this is how I keep her memory alive," James explained in a 1985 interview with the Milwaukee Journal. Through his advocacy work, James became a prominent voice for crime victims' rights and was instrumental in improving communication between police departments and grieving families. Colleen and Bridget, Margaret's younger sisters, were only 15 and 13 years old respectively when their sister was murdered, and the trauma fundamentally altered the trajectory of their lives. Colleen became intensely protective of Bridget, rarely allowing her younger sister out of her sight and developing anxiety disorders that required ongoing medical treatment. Both sisters left Milwaukee as soon as they were old enough, with Colleen moving to Minneapolis and Bridget relocating to Chicago, though they maintained close relationships with each other and continued to pressure police for updates on the investigation well into the 1990s. The Sullivan family's grief was compounded by the constant reminders of their loss that pervaded their daily lives in Milwaukee's tight-knit Irish community. Every walk to the grocery store took them past places where Margaret had lived, worked, and socialized, and every family gathering was marked by the conspicuous absence of her laughter and vibrant personality. The family's financial situation, always precarious, became even more challenging after Margaret's death, as Catherine was unable to continue taking in sewing work due to her emotional state, and Thomas missed significant time from his job at Allen Bradley due to his involvement in the investigation. The veterinarian's ledger discovery sent shockwaves through more than just the immediate investigation team. When news leaked to the broader veterinary community, it sparked an unprecedented examination of professional ethics and record-keeping practices. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, president of the Wisconsin Veterinary Medical Association, recalled receiving the initial briefing about the ledger's contents. "I've been practicing for 37 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. But reading those entries, seeing how someone could document such atrocities with the same clinical detachment used for routine procedures, it fundamentally changed how I view our profession's responsibility," she stated during a press conference held 3 weeks after the discovery. The ledger's impact extended far beyond its evidentiary value in the Morrison case. Forensic veterinary pathology, a relatively new field, suddenly found itself thrust into the spotlight as investigators realized they had been overlooking a crucial source of evidence in cold cases nationwide. Dr. Marcus Steinberg, a forensic veterinary consultant, brought in to analyze the ledger's technical aspects, explained the significance of what they had uncovered. "What we're seeing here is essentially a confession, written in veterinary terminology. The perpetrator documented not just the acts themselves, but the progression of techniques, the experimental nature of the violence. "It's unprecedented in my 22 years of forensic work," Steinberg noted. His analysis revealed that the entries spanned a period of nearly 8 months, beginning approximately 3 weeks before Sarah Morrison's disappearance and continuing for months afterward. The psychological profile of Dr. Marcus Webb began to crystallize as investigators worked with criminal psychologists to decode the ledger's contents. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist specializing in serial offenders, spent countless hours analyzing the progression of entries. What we observe is a clear escalation pattern, but written with the detached professionalism of someone accustomed to documenting suffering. The clinical language serves as a psychological buffer, allowing the perpetrator to distance himself from the reality of what he's describing, Rodriguez explained. Her analysis revealed disturbing patterns of experimentation and a methodical approach to violence that suggested extensive planning and forethought. The community's reaction to Webb's arrest had been complex, but the ledger's discovery added new layers of horror and betrayal. Margaret Collins, who had brought her family's pets to Webb for over 15 years, struggled to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster revealed in those pages. "He treated my children's hamsters, my daughter's rabbit when it was sick. He was so gentle, so caring. To think that those same hands, that same mind that helped heal our pets, was capable of what's written in that book. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about human nature," Collins said, her voice breaking during a television interview. The revelation that Webb had been documenting his crimes in the same methodical way he recorded legitimate veterinary procedures created a profound sense of violation that extended beyond Sarah's family to the entire community of pet owners who had trusted him. The technical analysis of the ledger revealed disturbing details about Webb's methodology and mindset. Handwriting experts confirmed that all entries were written in Webb's distinctive script, using the same type of pen he typically used for professional documentation. The paper matched supplies found in his clinic, and ink analysis confirmed the entries were made during the time frame investigators suspected. More chilling was the discovery that Webb had used a coding system, initially appearing as routine veterinary abbreviations, but actually detailing locations, times, and methods. Cryptographer Jennifer Walsh, brought in to decode Webb's system, found the pattern both sophisticated and deeply disturbing. He created an entire symbolic language to document these crimes, hidden in plain sight among legitimate veterinary records. If investigators hadn't known what to look for, these entries could have been dismissed as routine clinical notes, Walsh explained. The ledger's discovery also revealed the true scope of Webb's activities. While Sarah Morrison remained the only confirmed victim, several entries suggested other potential crimes that investigators began examining with renewed urgency. Detective Reynolds found himself leading a multi-state task force as similar disappearances in neighboring areas suddenly took on new significance. "We're looking at approximately 12 cases spanning a 15-year period, where the circumstances and geography align with Webb's documented movements. The ledger gives us a roadmap we never had before," Reynolds stated during a briefing with federal authorities. The possibility that Sarah Morrison was not Webb's only victim transformed the investigation from a single cold case into a potential serial killer investigation. The impact on the Morrison family was profound and complex. While the ledger provided the concrete evidence they had desperately sought for decades, its contents also revealed details about Sarah's final hours that no family should ever have to confront. Thomas Morrison, now 73 and suffering from early-stage dementia, struggled to process the revelations. His wife Eleanor made the difficult decision to shield him from the ledger's more graphic contents, consulting with grief counselors about how to handle the psychological impact on their surviving family members. "We wanted answers. We prayed for answers for 59 years. But some answers come with a price that's almost too heavy to bear," Eleanor said in a statement read by her attorney. The legal proceedings took on new complexity with the ledger's discovery. Webb's defense team, already struggling with overwhelming DNA evidence, found themselves facing documentation that appeared to be their client's own confession. Defense attorney Robert Marshall attempted to challenge the ledger's authenticity and admissibility, arguing that the coded entries were subject to interpretation and that their client's failing health made meaningful participation in his defense impossible. However, prosecutors had anticipated these challenges. District Attorney Catherine Moore assembled a team of experts whose combined testimony made the ledger's significance undeniable. The defendant created his own worst enemy when he decided to document these crimes. His compulsion to record and analyze his actions has provided us with evidence more compelling than any witness testimony could be, Moore stated during pre-trial hearings. The broader implications of the ledger's discovery extended into veterinary education and professional oversight. Veterinary schools across the country began examining their curricula to include stronger emphasis on professional ethics and the psychological aspects of animal care. The American Veterinary Medical Association launched a comprehensive review of professional standards, specifically addressing the intersection of veterinary knowledge and criminal behavior. Dr. Amanda Foster, Dean of the University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine, announced the creation of a new mandatory course on professional responsibility and psychological wellness. We have a duty to ensure that the knowledge we provide is used only for healing and helping. This case has shown us that we must be more vigilant about the psychological fitness of those we train and certify, Foster explained during a faculty meeting that resulted in significant curriculum changes. The technological aspects of solving the case also sparked innovation in forensic science. The combination of advanced DNA analysis and document examination techniques used to authenticate and decode Webb's ledger became a model for other cold case investigations. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit incorporated the case study into their training programs, using Webb's documentation patterns to help investigators identify similar coding systems in other cases. Special Agent Laura Chen, who consulted on the Morrison case, noted the precedent it set for forensic document analysis. The Webb case demonstrates how perpetrators sometimes create their own evidence trails without realizing it. We're now training investigators to look for these hidden confession patterns in seemingly innocuous documents, Chen explained during a conference presentation that has been widely circulated among law enforcement agencies. The community healing process proved to be long and complex. The revelation that someone so trusted and respected had been harboring such darkness for decades forced Milwaukee residents to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil and deception. Community leaders organized support groups and counseling sessions, particularly for families who had been patients of Webb's veterinary practice. Pastor Michael Davidson of St. Paul's Lutheran Church, where several Morrison family members had been longtime congregants, struggled to provide spiritual guidance in the face of such calculated evil. We've been asking why for nearly 60 years, and now we have answers that somehow make the questions even more difficult. How does someone live two such completely different lives? How do we reconcile the healing we witnessed with the harm we now know he caused? Davidson said during a special service dedicated to Sarah's memory and the family's journey toward closure. The investigation's conclusion brought mixed emotions for everyone involved. Detective Reynolds, who had devoted the final years of his career to solving Sarah's case, found himself simultaneously satisfied and haunted by the resolution. You spend decades wondering what happened, building theories, following leads that go nowhere. Then suddenly you have answers that are more horrific than anything you imagined. Justice has been served, but the price of that justice includes knowledge that changes how you see the world. Reynolds reflected during his final interview before retirement. His dedication to the case had cost him personally, straining family relationships and affecting his health, but he expressed no regrets about the time and energy invested in seeking truth for the Morrison family. The legal conclusion came swiftly once the ledger's contents were fully analyzed and authenticated. Webb, faced with overwhelming evidence including his own documented confessions, accepted a plea agreement that spared him the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. His allocution in court was brief and clinical, lacking the emotion or remorse that victims' families typically hope to see. I acknowledge responsibility for the death of Sarah Morrison and accept the court's judgment, Webb stated in a flat, emotionless tone that chilled everyone present. The lack of apparent remorse, only reinforced the psychological profile that had emerged from analysis of his ledger entries. The Morrison family's journey toward healing remained ongoing even after Webb's sentencing. Eleanor Morrison, now the sole surviving immediate family member, established the Sarah Morrison Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting cold case investigations and providing resources for families of missing persons. Sarah's story ends with justice, but so many families are still waiting for answers. If our decades of pain can somehow help bring closure to others, then something positive comes from this tragedy, Eleanor said during the Foundation's inaugural event. The Foundation's first grant funded advanced forensic technology for the Milwaukee Police Department's cold case unit. The case's resolution had lasting impacts on investigative procedures and professional standards. The Wisconsin State Legislature passed the Sarah Morrison Act, requiring enhanced background checks and psychological evaluations for veterinary licensure, and mandating secure storage of professional records that could potentially contain evidence of criminal activity. The law also established protocols for law enforcement access to professional records in missing person cases, closing loopholes that had previously made such documents difficult to obtain and examine. The story of Sarah Morrison's case ultimately became a testament to the persistence of those who refused to let injustice fade into obscurity. From Detective Reynolds' unwavering commitment to the Morrison family's decades-long advocacy for answers, the case demonstrated that truth, however delayed, can eventually emerge. The discovery of Webb's ledger proved that sometimes the evidence needed to solve the most challenging cases exists in unexpected places, waiting for the right combination of technology, dedication, and insight to reveal its secrets. As the community of Milwaukee continues to process the revelations and their implications, Sarah Morrison's memory serves as both a reminder of innocence lost and hope that justice, though sometimes long delayed, can ultimately prevail. Her story, marked by tragedy but concluded with resolution, offers lessons about resilience, the evolution of investigative science, and the profound importance of never abandoning the search for truth. No matter how much time passes or how cold the trail becomes,